The recycled air of Kara Station carried the acrid tang of exotic waste and the sweet copper scent that never quite left Vin Carrick's nostrils. At 58, with more artificial parts than original flesh, he navigated the station's labyrinthine markets with the practiced ease of someone who had learned to survive in places where survival wasn't guaranteed. Kara Station orbited the gas giant Helios Prime, a nexus for the exotic creature trade that flourished in the gray zones between Galactic Council oversight and local enforcement. The station's rotating sections created artificial gravity that fluctuated unpredictably, making even simple tasks a constant adjustment. Traders from across the galaxy converged here, seeking rare specimens for research entertainment or more dubious purposes. Vin's mission was supposed to be simple: deliver the crystal data core containing the life's work of Dr. Elena Solaris to the Xenobiology Research Facility on Kepler 7th. The aged Marine kept the crystal secured in a reinforced compartment near his artificial heart, its quantum-encrypted contents holding taxonomical records and cultural preservation protocols that the late scientist had died protecting. But simple missions had a way of becoming complicated on Kara Station. The auction house occupied the station's central hub, where the artificial gravity was most stable. Vin had been cutting through the main corridor when the sounds drew him in, not the typical babble of auctioneers and bidders, but something else. Something that made his enhanced hearing recalibrate involuntarily. Through the transparent steel partition he saw them. 8 dragonlings each, no larger than a house cat huddled together in a containment field. Their scales shimmered with an iridescent blue-green that seemed to shift with their emotional state. What stopped Vin cold wasn't their beauty. He'd seen plenty of exotic creatures pass through stations like this. It was the pattern of their movements, the way they pressed against each other, and the sounds they were making. They weren't just crying, they were calling. Item 779. The auctioneer announced his voice, carrying the practiced indifference of someone who sold sentient beings daily. 8 juvenile specimens of Draco Veganus. Non-sentient classification confirmed by Galactic Corporate Authority. Excellent specimens for neural pathway research or exotic pet trade. Bidding starts at 50,000 Galactic Standard Units. Non-sentient. The word hit Vin like a plasma bolt to the chest. He watched as one of the dragonlings, the smallest, with patches of darker blue around what might have been ears, pressed its tiny clawed hands against the containment field. Its mouth opened, and a sound emerged that was more than just noise. It was structured, musical, desperate. The bidding began in earnest. Representatives from various corporations raised their paddles with detached efficiency. Vin recognized the insignias Nexus Biotech, the Kuiper Consortium, and several others, whose business models he didn't want to contemplate. One of the dragonlings had stopped moving. Its little chest rose and fell with labored breathing, and the others had formed a protective circle around it. As Vin watched, they began to sing, if it could be called singing. It was a high-pitched, resonant sound that seemed to bypass the ears entirely and resonate in the bones. The sound triggered something in Vin's memory implants. Not his own memories, but data from the crystal core. Dr. Solaris had studied the Vegan civilization before its collapse, had documented their music language, their collective memory stored in harmonic patterns. These weren't just animals, they were children. 200,000 came a bid from a representative, wearing the black and gold of the Galactic Corporate Authority. Vin's hand moved before his conscious mind had decided. He pushed through the crowd, his military augmentations automatically calculating paths through the dense assembly. His voice, when it came, carried the authority of someone who had commanded troops across 3 star systems. Stop the auction. The auctioneer paused, stylus hovering over his holopad. Sir, please return to... I invoke Cultural Heritage Preservation Protocol 7 Alpha. Vin announced his words, carrying across the suddenly quiet auction house. These creatures are protected under Galactic Council Resolution 2387, as documented by Dr. Elena Solaris of the Xenocultural Research Institute. A murmur ran through the crowd. The corporate authority representative stood his augmented features, shifting into an expression of controlled annoyance. That protocol requires authenticated documentation and proper legal standing. You can't just... Vin reached into his jacket, his movements slow and deliberate. The crystal core emerged, its surface pulsing with bioluminescent patterns as it activated in response to the dragonling's continued calls. I have the authentication right here. And as for legal standing, I am the designated executor of Dr. Solaris's research estate, with full authority to protect any species covered under her conservation protocols. It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either. The crystal contained enough evidence to make his claim stick, at least long enough to get the dragonlings out of immediate danger. The auctioneer looked between Vin and the corporate representative, clearly out of his depth with interstellar legal protocols. I'll need to verify this with station authority. You do that, Vin said. In the meantime, I'll be taking these children into protective custody. The word children sent another ripple through the crowd. The corporate rep stepped forward, his hand resting on what was clearly a weapon. Sir, those specimens have been legally acquired, and... The dragonling song suddenly changed. What had been individual calls became a harmony, 8 voices weaving together in a pattern that made the air itself seem to vibrate. The sound grew not in volume, but in complexity, and suddenly, every display screen in the auction house flickered to life. Images appeared, not random data, but coherent pictures. Vast crystal cities reaching toward alien suns. Beings that looked like larger versions of the dragonlings, their voices joining in songs that reshaped the very air around them. And then inevitably, the images of destruction. Ships with corporate insignias raining fire from above. Cities falling. The last survivors fleeing into the deep cold of space. The song stopped abruptly, leaving a silence that seemed to echo with the weight of an entire civilization's memory. My God, someone whispered. They're not animals, they're people. The corporate representative's composure finally cracked. This is unacceptable. Kara Station operates under commercial law, not council jurisdiction. These specimens, these children, Vin corrected firmly, are now under my protection, and I suggest you take your complaint to whatever court has jurisdiction over genocide. The auction house had descended into chaos, with some buyers demanding refunds and others trying to push forward with alternative acquisitions. Vin ignored it all, focused on the containment field, and the 8 pairs of eyes looking up at him with something that might have been hope. The station authority arrived within minutes, but by then, Vin had already disabled the containment field, a trick learned in 2 decades of military service, and the dragonlings had swarmed to him, tiny claws, gripping his armor with surprising strength. Captain Rebecca Santos of Kara Station Security was a practical woman who understood that sometimes problems were best solved by making them someone else's responsibility. After a tense 3-hour negotiation involving actual lawyers connecting via quantum relay, she made her decision. The council has confirmed the validity of the Cultural Heritage Protocol, she announced. The specimen subjects are released to your custody, Mr. Carrick. However, I am officially notifying you that the Galactic Corporate Authority has filed for immediate review and will likely seek an injunction within 48 hours. Vin nodded, gathering the dragonlings in a portable habitat unit that Santos had reluctantly provided. Understood. I'll need access to a private quarters section and basic life support supplies. Sub-level 7, Section C. You'll have privacy there, but Mr. Carrick, Santos leaned closer, lowering her voice. Whatever those things are, they've just cost some very powerful people a lot of money. I'd watch my back if I were you. The quarters on Sub-level 7 were cramped, but functional, a traveling merchant's temporary lodging with basic amenities, and a small adjacent storage area that Vin converted into a space for the dragonlings. They seemed to understand that they were safe, at least for now. But the smallest one, the one he'd started thinking of as Blue, remained listless and weak. Vin had limited experience with alien physiology, but Dr. Solaris's data core contained extensive notes on vegan biology. He rigged a feeding system that provided nutrients in the form of a light suspension that the dragonlings could absorb through their skin. More importantly, he set up a sonic environment that matched the harmonic frequencies documented in the cultural archives. The response was immediate. The dragonlings perked up their scales, brightening, and they began to explore their new environment with cautious curiosity. Blue managed to lift her head, though she still moved little. It was during the first night that Vin truly began to understand what he was dealing with. He had been reviewing the crystal data, cross-referencing the dragonlings' physical characteristics with cultural documentation when he heard them singing again. But this time, he was close enough to feel it as well as hear it. The sound wasn't just auditory. It was tactile, emotional, almost telepathic. As their voices joined in harmony, Vin found himself seeing flashes of images, not through his eyes, but directly in his mind. Vast libraries where knowledge was stored not in books, but in songs. Councils where decisions were made through musical consensus. Gardens where plants grew in response to carefully modulated tones. The vegan people hadn't just had a language. They'd had a living language where meaning was conveyed through harmony, rhythm, and resonance. And these 8 dragonlings weren't just the last of their species. They were the last carriers of an entire way of thinking. But there was something more personal in the song. As Vin listened, he began to understand that they were trying to tell him something specific. The crystal core at his chest grew warm, its patterns matching the rhythm of their music, and suddenly he knew. They were dreaming of home. Not the home that had been destroyed, but another place. Coordinates that meant something. A sanctuary that Dr. Solaris had located, but never been able to reach. Vin spent the next day decoding the harmonic patterns, using the crystal core's analytical systems to translate rhythm and tone into navigational data. The process was painstaking, requiring him to understand not just what they were communicating, but how they thought. The breakthrough came when Blue, the weakest of the group, managed to crawl over to where he was working. She pressed her tiny hands against the crystal core, and suddenly, the harmonics aligned with perfect clarity. The coordinates weren't just for a place, they were for a time. A synchronization point where ancient vegan technology would recognize its children and respond. Vin was still working through the implications when Captain Santos's warning proved prophetic. They came in the middle of the night cycle, not bothering with pretense. The door to Vin's quarters simply dissolved under the touch of a military-grade quantum cutter, and 6 figures in powered armor filed in with practiced efficiency. Vincent Carrick, the lead figure, announced, her voice artificially modulated through the armor's speakers. "You are in violation of Galactic Commercial Code 779. Surrender the specimens and come with us." Vin was already moving his military training, overriding 2 decades of civilian life. He rolled behind the quarter's small kitchen unit as the first neural disruptor blast scarred the wall where he'd been standing. "The Council," he began, "has been overruled by Emergency Corporate Tribunal." The leader cut him off. "The specimens represent vital commercial assets. They will be transferred to proper corporate custody for humane research purposes." The dragonlings had awoken at the sound of the intrusion, and their reaction was immediate and visceral. What started as distress calls quickly escalated into something else entirely. The harmonic pattern that emerged made Vin's bones ache and caused several of the attackers to stumble. "Neural scramblers," the leader ordered. "Whatever frequency they're using." She never finished the command. Blue, the smallest and weakest of the dragonlings, had done something that Vin's enhanced hearing was just barely able to detect. She had changed the harmonic frequency of her voice to match the natural resonance of the station's hull. The effect was catastrophic. Every speaker, communicator, and display screen in the immediate vicinity came online, simultaneously broadcasting the dragonlings' desperate song throughout Sublevel 7. But more than that, the crystal core's quantum uplink had somehow synchronized with the station's communication array. Across Kara Station, in every public space and private quarter screens, flickered to life with the same message: sentient beings in distress, cultural genocide in progress, Galactic Council protection invoked. The documentation was irrefutable. Dr. Solaris's research, enhanced by the harmonic testimony of the Dragonlings themselves, created a legal and ethical case that even corporate lawyers would struggle to dismiss. But more importantly, it created witnesses, thousands of them. The attacking force hesitated clearly, receiving new orders through their communication systems. In that moment of uncertainty, the Dragonling's song reached a crescendo that seemed to resonate not just through the station, but somehow beyond it. Vin felt something activate in the crystal core. Not data transfer or communication, but something deeper. A calling that reached across space to technology that had slept for millennia. "Stand down," the leader finally ordered her team. "We have new instructions." She turned to Vin, her modulated voice, carrying what might have been frustration. "You have 48 hours to transfer the specimens to neutral custody, pending full council review. If you attempt to leave the station with them, you will be stopped." After they left, Vin sat among the Dragonlings, all of whom had pressed close to him in the aftermath of the confrontation. Blue looked up at him with eyes that held far too much intelligence and sadness for any creature classified as non-sentient. "You know, don't you?" he said softly. "You know this isn't over." Her response was a gentle trill that somehow conveyed agreement, sorrow, and determination. Vin made his decision. The next 36 hours were spent in careful preparation. Using the station's general fabrication facilities, Vin created a mobile life support system that could sustain the Dragonlings during interstellar travel. More challenging was modifying his personal transport, a military surplus courier ship called the Redemption, to accommodate his unusual passengers. The crystal core proved invaluable, not just for its navigational data, but for the technical specifications it contained. Dr. Solaris had been preparing for this moment, had designed equipment specifically for the eventual rescue and relocation of Vegan survivors. The hardest part was keeping the Dragonlings calm during the modifications. They seemed to understand that something significant was happening, and their anxiety manifested in constant, low-level harmonics that made complex work difficult. It was Blue who finally solved the problem. While Vin struggled with a particularly delicate sonic calibration, she began to hum a simple, repetitive pattern that gradually calmed the others. Soon, all 8 were contributing to a working song that actually helped Vin focus. For the first time since finding them, Vin allowed himself to hope that this might actually work. The departure almost didn't happen. As Vin led the Dragonlings through the station's service corridors toward the docking bay, every junction seemed to hold potential threats. Twice, they had to take detours when security patrols appeared at inconvenient moments. At the final checkpoint before the docking bay, they were stopped. "Cargo inspection," the security guard announced, though his nervous glance toward the upper observation deck suggested he wasn't acting entirely on his own initiative. Vin presented his documentation, the crystal core's authentication protocols, working overtime to create convincing transit permits. The guard scanned everything twice, his expression growing more troubled. "Sir, I have orders to detain any shipments of exotic creatures." That's when the Dragonlings sang. Not the desperate calls of before, nor the complex patterns of cultural memory. This was something simpler, more personal. A lullaby, perhaps, or a farewell song. The guard, a young man who couldn't have been more than 25, listened with growing amazement. When the song ended, he handed back Vin's documentation without another word. "Safe travels," he said quietly, stepping aside. The Redemption's engines spun up with the deep thrum of quantum drives engaging. As the ship broke free of Kara Station's gravity, Vin felt a tension he hadn't realized he was carrying finally ease. But their destination remained a mystery that would only reveal itself in the journey. The coordinates the Dragonlings had provided led to a region of space that appeared empty on all standard charts, a void between spiral arms where no star systems were recorded. But as they approached, the crystal core began to pulse with increasing frequency, its patterns synchronizing with the harmonic output of the dragonlings. There, Blue sang her voice now, strong enough to resonate through the ship's hull. Home. And suddenly Vin could see it. The moon had been invisible to conventional sensors, wrapped in some kind of refractive field that bent light around it. But as the Redemption's proximity triggered ancient recognition protocols, the camouflage fell away. It was beautiful. Crystalline structures covered the lunar surface in fractal patterns that seemed to shift and change as they watched. Towers that looked like massive wind chimes caught starlight and transformed it into rainbow cascades. And at the surface, spaces that could only be described as gardens, where geometric patterns suggested growth, guided by intelligence and artistry. The landing was easier than Vin had expected. The moon's automated systems guided the Redemption to a landing platform that rose from the surface as they approached. As soon as they settled, atmosphere fields activated, creating a breathable envelope around the ship. The dragonlings were vibrating with excitement, their scales practically glowing with bioluminescent patterns Vin had never seen before. As the ship's ramp lowered, they rushed forward, then stopped at the threshold, looking back at him with what seemed like invitation. Vin stepped onto the surface of the moon and into a world transformed by song. The structures weren't buildings in any conventional sense, they were musical instruments. Vast resonance chambers designed to amplify and modify harmonic patterns. Wind flowed through carefully designed channels, creating bass notes that provided a foundation for more complex compositions. But more than that, they were memory banks. As the dragonlings spread out across the nearest structures, touching surfaces with their hands and voices, the crystal formations began to glow. Data flowed in patterns of light and sound archives awakening after millennia of silence. The dragonlings were no longer dragonlings. In this environment, they began to grow not just physically, but mentally, intellectually. Blue, the smallest, was the first to reach what was obviously an interface node. As her hands touched the crystal surface, her voice joined with the moon's own harmonic field. And then Vin heard the stories. Not in words, but in pure meaning, conveyed through resonance and harmony. The history of a people who had turned sound into science music, into technology. A civilization that had achieved interstellar travel, not through mechanical propulsion, but through harmonic manipulation of space-time itself. They had been peaceful, focused on preservation and growth, rather than expansion and conquest, which had made them vulnerable when the corporate fleets arrived with their resource surveys and territory claims. They fought. Blue's voice reached him somehow, now speaking in words he could understand, translated through the moon systems. But fighting was not their way. So they ran, bringing the children here to safety. The children, Vin repeated, understanding flooding through him. You're not the last of the Vegan people. You're the future. We were meant to sleep. Another voice said, one of Blue's companions, now visibly growing into adolescent form. To dream, until it was time to carry the songs forward. But the sleeping chambers were found too soon. We were taken before the maturation cycle was complete. Around them, the moon continued its awakening. Gardens that had lain dormant burst into bloom, not plants as humans understood them, but living harmonics that created beauty through sound and light. The towers began to sing their notes, weaving together in a composition that seemed to encompass the entire moon. Dr. Solaris knew, Vin said, touching the crystal core at his chest. She prepared for this. Blue nodded, her form now clearly humanoid, though still bearing the scaled beauty of her species. Her songs are here too. She learned our ways, became part of the preservation. And now we grow. Now we learn. Now we remember. Blue looked up at the stars, where the galaxy turned in its endless dance. And when we are ready, we return. Not to fight, but to teach. To share what should not be lost. Vin found himself smiling for the first time in years. And what about me? I'm not exactly equipped for long-term residence on a moon full of musical crystalline technology. Blue's response was another song, but this one carried laughter as well as meaning. Around them, the other young Vegan joined in their voices, weaving together in harmonies that spoke of gratitude, belonging, and purpose. "You are the guardian," they sang together. "The one who remembers the songs of other ways, who bridges what was with what will be." The crystal core at Vin's chest pulsed once more, its data integrating with the moon's systems. He understood then that Dr. Solaris had been more than just a scientist studying the Vegan culture. She had been a guardian too, preparing the way for this moment. As the moon's song grew stronger, reaching out to touch the harmonics of the galaxy itself, Vin settled onto a crystal formation that shaped itself into a chair. Around him, 8 children became 8 adolescents, then 8 adults, their growth guided by song and memory, and the patient wisdom of a species that measured time in harmonies. It would be years before they were ready to return to the galaxy. Years of learning, growing, and preparing for a different kind of contact with the wider universe. And Vin would be here for all of it, guardian and observer bridge between a civilization of sound and a galaxy that had forgotten how to listen. Above them, the stars sang a cosmic harmony that had always been there, waiting for those who knew how to hear it. And in that moment, Vin understood that sometimes the most important journeys weren't about reaching a destination, but about learning how to truly listen along the way. The moon turned, carrying its cargo of song and memory, while in the distance, the galaxy continued its dance. But now, at least, the music would continue. The songs would be remembered. And somewhere in the cosmic symphony, 8 voices that had nearly been silenced would grow strong enough to teach the galaxy how to sing again. In his final log entry that night, transmitted to no one but preserved by the moon's memory systems, Vin wrote, "Today, I learned that the most important military action isn't always about who you defeat, but who you protect. I came to this moon expecting to deliver data. Instead, I found purpose. The dragonlings are safe. The songs will continue. And maybe, just maybe, an old Marine has learned that the best way to fight against the darkness is to help others remember the light." The moon sang his words into permanence, where they would wait with all the other stories until the day when the galaxy would be ready to hear them again.